let's talk a little bit about sponsorship this morning. So I don't know if any of you have read Sylvia-Anne Hewlett's book or read any of the articles on sponsorship. I always do quite like this image. I've stolen this from the cover of her book, which is called Get a Sponsor, Not a Mentor, which actually will come on to this idea of sponsorship versus mentorship, and it's not quite as binary as the book title suggests. But I do like this idea of kind of sponsors being those kind of whales below the surface, helping to move people along and keep people afloat. You often sort of don't necessarily see them or know they're there. So anyway, I enjoyed drawing that last night at about 10 o'clock. So I'm interested to know from all of you, to get us a bit of perspective with where we all are in terms of sponsorship. Let me know using annotation whether you feel at the moment like you've got a sponsor, that you don't feel like you've got a sponsor, or maybe you think I don't understand enough yet, or I don't know enough about sponsorship to know either way. So use the annotation, view options, annotate, stamp, use the stars, use the crosses. Do you feel like you've got a sponsor, not got a sponsor, not sure? No right or wrong. Well, someone's gone with a square this morning. Okay, so quite a lot of no's so far. Just wait for the last few people. View options, annotate, stamp, and then stars. And then let me know in chat what the challenges are. So if you're thinking, well, I haven't got one, like, do you know why? What's hindering? What's getting in the way? What are your question marks? And we'll go on to talk a bit about then the how. What I've tried to do is really think about the how for this morning. Yeah, Mara, yeah, where would I get one? Where are they? How do I get one? Okay, we're going to talk about that. Don't know where to start, Adam. Okay, great. We're going to cover these things. Making sure they're the right person. Yeah, interesting, Frankie. That's a good question. Roy, yeah, you're building your own business, so you don't know where to start. Yeah, it's interesting. I think I was thinking about this last night, about the difference between sponsorship in a company versus a sponsorship in your own company. So yeah, people don't really get it. Yeah, interesting. Okay, so actually having the confidence to feel like you've got something to offer, I promise you everybody has. We'll talk a bit about that as well. Okay, they're really useful insights. Thank you, everybody. And hopefully what we're going to talk about this morning will help address some of these things. Good. Yeah, can a sponsor be from a different department in your company? Absolutely. I think they can be from a different company. So we'll dive into that. We'll start to get into the specifics of sponsorship this morning. Let's just talk about this idea of mentoring versus sponsorship, because I think this does come up a lot and people get not kind of sure what the difference is. So just as a group, let me know in chat, what do you see as the difference between mentoring and sponsorship? Or do you think, I think they're the same thing, or I'm not really sure? But if it's something that, if you have either listened to the podcast or if you've read about this before, you've thought about this, how do you see the difference between the two? And then I'll let you know kind of how I think about this. Mentoring versus sponsorship. Let me just clear those. Okay, so Reg is saying up until yesterday, thought maybe it was more the financial side. That's interesting, Katie. Sponsorship is more reciprocal for you. Okay. Leslie, love that. Mentor gives advice, a sponsor kind of opens doors. That's very close to kind of Sylvia-Anne Hewlett's version of how she would talk about the difference between the two. Roy, I love that. A sponsor is maybe more of an advocate, whereas perhaps a mentor is more about advice. Advocacy versus advice is interesting, actually. That's probably quite a good way to think of it. They're two quite useful words, advice versus advocacy. Maybe a sponsor is a bit more active sometimes in terms of advocacy. Elaine, that's interesting. Mentoring feels more tactical sometimes. Sponsorship maybe more strategic. Helps with opportunities. Great. So some good ways of thinking about this here. I think the first thing just to get rid of here is this idea of somebody is definitely either one or the other. because actually one of the things that Sylvia-Ann Hewlett does actually talk about is that mentors are often the people who become sponsors. And if you think about it, actually that's because when someone's mentoring you, often initially you're getting to know them. As people have said in the chat, they're giving you help and advice, they're helping you to learn. But then over time, the more they know you, the more likely they are to be able to actively advocate on your behalf. So it's no surprise that lots of mentors become sponsors over time. Who do you think are also the most likely people to become sponsors other than mentors? Which has certainly been my experience in my career. So mentors, absolutely. But who's the other most obvious kind of candidate? Yeah, managers. That's interesting, Laura, you're saying ex-bosses. I think actually it can be, I think current managers can be sponsors, but perhaps you're also kind of saying, and people you've worked for in the past, which again, definitely true in my experience. Yeah, so managers, particularly your manager, your direct manager, because they know you really well and they see your work. But to James's point, generally leaders in an organization can also be your sponsors. You don't need to work for someone for them to be your sponsor. So any kind of senior leader, again, can also become a sponsor. But I think I would define difference between mentoring and sponsorship probably in this kind of maybe the level of outwardly kind of active advocacy that someone is able to do on your behalf. I think I could have a mentoring conversation with someone who could give me some really good advice, give me some perspectives. Mentors might even make connections for you. But I think when you get into sponsorship, almost people are proactively looking for opportunities on your behalf. You're kind of top of mind for someone. So I think that's kind of the way that I think about it, which was what makes sponsors so powerful. So what I've tried to do for today is I try to think about kind of 5 things, 5 almost either questions to ask yourself, so coach yourself questions, or actions that you can take if you're thinking either I haven't got a sponsor or I want to think more about sponsorship, because we can see why sponsors are kind of so powerful because they do open doors for us. And actually, interestingly, I wrote this down somewhere, it's 19, in the latest research that Sylvia-Ann Hewlett has done, 19% of men say that they have a sponsor and 14% of women. So actually those numbers are quite low in terms of just generally the amount of people who feel like they've got a really active sponsor. So, you know, don't feel like you're alone if you're thinking this is not something I've got right now. So if sponsors help to open doors, I think the first question you've got to ask yourself is, what doors do you want opening? So rather than thinking generally about sponsorship or wanting a sponsor or needing a sponsor, think about, well, what would I like a sponsor to be able to do for me? What are the gaps that I've got that I think a sponsor could support me with? Would you like a sponsor because you're thinking, well, my ambition is to get on the board of this company, so therefore I need a sponsor to kind of help me with that ambition, to help me realize that ambition? Do I need a sponsor because I'm trying to grow my business in different directions? And I think I need to develop some sponsorship for people who could help open some of those doors. What kinds of connections do you not have that you would ideally like? And so, for example, when I moved from working in big organizations to Amazing If, what I realized is that a lot of my sponsors came from marketing. They got marketing connections, marketing backgrounds, and a lot of the doors that had been opened for me in the first 15 years of my career were marketing doors, essentially. And suddenly I was spending all of my time, or much more of my time, in people development, people leadership, and HR generally. I've never worked in a HR department in an organization. So one of the things that we needed, and that I personally needed, was someone who could open doors in terms of into the world of HR. So some of that was about knowledge, some of that was about spotting opportunities with companies, some of that was about introductions, but it was specifically around this kind of one area where I didn't really feel like I got any sponsorship, and then thinking about, well, who could advocate for me and for, in my instance, my organization within that world. So first question to ask yourself, what doors do you want opening for you? Because then that will help you, I think, with who are then the right people to sponsor you. Then number two, and I found this really useful when I've thought about sponsorship, particularly when I was in a company, is actually have a look around your organisation and spot sponsors. I think you can, whether it's in your organisation or in your industry, you can spot people who are natural sponsors, who do this because they enjoy it and they get a lot of satisfaction from it. It's their way of kind of giving back, of paying forward. They perhaps recognise that sponsorship has really helped them in their career. And I was trying to think, right, how have I spotted sponsors in the past and how do I think about this now? I look for people who are really good in terms of being generous with their connections. You know, they maybe naturally connect people within an organisation or externally. They don't have a kind of closed perspective to their connections. They want to be helpful. They want to support people to get to know other people. They want to be helpful. So look for people who do that. I think look for people who are saying kind of positive things about other people. I think in organizations, again, you can spot those people who sort of leave their ego at the door. I think that was maybe a Sylvia Ann Hewlett phrase. She sort of said, you know, people who are happy to kind of leave their ego, because these are often senior people. And actually you hear them saying, this person is great, or have you seen the amazing work that this other person has done? So you can hear them, you actively hear people doing this and really championing and cheerleading other people. So, you know, look for people who do that. Look for people who've got a track record of having kind of done this before. And actually often sponsors, in my experience, don't just sponsor one person. Sometimes I think when you hear some of the examples that Sylvie talked about on the podcast, it sounds like one person has one sponsee. So for every sponsor, you have one sponsee, but actually that's not been my experience. In my experience, in my career, when I think about my sponsors, I wasn't their only person that they were advocating for. Actually, they were doing it for a number of people at once. And so just because someone already, you kind of go, oh, that person feels like they're really sponsoring X person over here, probably makes them even more likely to do it for A, B, C extra people, because they sort of have that as part of the way that they work. So look for people who are already doing it, who've got a track record of doing it. Perhaps people who are great at promoting different people, who, you know, a bit braver perhaps in terms of where they get people from. I often knew that people were sponsors often if they would recruit me, because I came from a different background, or I perhaps had a bit of a less linear career, unsurprisingly. And then just make sure that you're also just checking, if you kind of go, brilliant, that tick, tick, tick for those three, just make sure that they can open the doors that you're interested in. Back to that previous point, because somebody could be really good at these three things, but if they don't have the relevant knowledge or experience or expertise that you're looking for, they might be useful mentors because they're probably happy to help and supportive and got really interesting advice and perspectives to offer, but they might not be able to open the doors that are interesting for you. So maybe then they're more of a mentor. Those people can still be really, really valuable, but there is that difference between going, well, can those people open those doors you're interested in? I've actually got people now in my network who I think are much more mentors than they are sponsors, and they've been sponsors for me in the past, but because I've changed career, they're less able to open doors for me now. And that's absolutely okay, because again, if you've listened to the podcast, sponsors, sometimes sponsors last for a long time, but also sponsors come and go, depending on changes they make in their career, and also changes obviously you make as well. So just feel like, well, would they be the right sponsor for me? So try and spot those people. So know what doors you need to open or you'd like opening. Start to look for these characteristics in people. And then think about, what have you got to give? And this can feel hard because sponsors in the main do tend to be senior people, senior leaders in your organization, senior leaders in your industry. And at this point, you're sort of starting, a bit like we talk about with networking, being people helping people. We're saying, start to kind of get that sponsorship from thinking, what have I got to give that person? So it can feel like a tough question, but let me know in chat now, what ideas have you got in terms of what you think you might have to give to a sponsor? whether that's a sponsor you already have. So you might think, well, I know what I've got to give because I'm already doing it. Or what could you give? And I'll give you a few extra ideas as well. So what could you give to a sponsor? Brilliant, Leslie. Yeah, other connections. Love that. Connections, really good. Yeah, Kate, that's great. That's a nice way of putting it. Essentially doing a brilliant job. So, you know, if they're going to advocate for you, actually, if you do a brilliant job, that makes it makes their life really easy. Holly, great perspective, really important. Different perspectives, experiences. We're already getting to quite a long list. Oh, lovely, Ting. I love that. Almost your curiosity. So, like, what are you reading, watching, listening to that can be helpful? Yeah, alternative views, James, really good. Yeah, I like that. For a couple of people saying acknowledgement and thanks. I actually hadn't thought of that one. Really good. Actually saying thank you, letting them know how they're helping you. I always think when you're thinking here about what you have got to give, the first place I always start is I do think about my strengths, which is where lots of you will be going when you're thinking about your expertise and your experience. I start with my strengths because I think, well, that's me at my best. And you want sponsors to see you at your best. So I start with my strengths and then I think, how could that strength be useful for that person? Is there something I can volunteer for? Is there a project I can get involved in? Is that someone I could go and work for at some point? But how can I help that person to see me using my strengths? Because I think someone is much more likely to sponsor you when they've seen you be brilliant and kind of use your strengths. And then, and this is what Sylvie talks about much more than strengths actually, she sort of talks about this idea of like also what makes you distinctive. So for example, I mean, there's lots of us, but one of the things that I would say what makes you distinctive, you could go, okay, well, I'm a female leader, you know, so it could be about whether it's about gender or race, or perhaps you've got loads of digital knowledge, but something that kind of makes you, what are your kind of distinctive characteristics? And also those things that you're passionate about. I was always really passionate about kind of gender equality. I'd got that perspective as a female leader. So that wasn't necessarily a strength of mine, but it was something that I'd got to give, particularly actually male leaders. So if I think about a couple of my sponsors who are men, actually that was something that I could offer. I could offer a different gender perspective and my experiences as a woman in a big organization, particularly when I was in banking with lots of men. That just kind of is interesting. Sometimes I think you'll find, I definitely found this, occasionally I would think, oh, someone could be a really good sponsor. And actually you test the waters and you sort of find that that sponsorship is not forthcoming. And I was thinking about this, I really remember having a conversation once with a very senior male leader and essentially offering to kind of give my strengths. And this person was championing kind of female leadership at a board level, and me sort of saying, really like to get involved, like how can I help, offering to use my strengths. Pushed it a few times but didn't really get any sense of traction or kind of interest. And at that point, don't forget, it is always okay to then go, okay, well, that doesn't feel like a good fit, or that person isn't that interested in being a sponsor. I think you can't force sponsorship. If you don't feel that, I think of it as a bit like a push and pull. If you've kind of tried to think about what you can give and you've been active in that, if you don't feel that pull, it is okay to kind of let that go, because they won't be the right sponsor for you anyway. Like that person was never going to be the right sponsor for me, because, you know, I was offering to give him my time and my expertise, and he, to be honest, wasn't that bothered. And I thought, okay, well, I don't really want that person then sponsoring me, because I don't think they're genuinely that interested. Obviously keeping them anonymous. So just thinking about strengths and what makes you distinctive, and then how can you start showing those strengths. Yeah, I love that, James. I do think sponsorship can come organically. I think you can think about it for your career and think about it strategically, but I think often it kind of happens over time quite organically from working for someone in particular, I found, in terms of my managers. And then I just wanted to talk about this idea of kind of you at your best and really thinking about what is it how can somebody see you at your best? Because I think to be an active sponsor, they need to be specific. They need to be able to say, Sarah is brilliant at starting things from scratch. And I've seen her done that. I've seen her do that when she XXX. And they can give examples. And so just starting to think about, okay, what are the stories that you would like a sponsor to be able to share about you? What are those examples you want those people to be able to give? And it could be as simple as, like one of my previous bosses would definitely say about me, Sarah is always like incredibly curious. Maybe there's never a month that goes by where she doesn't send me something that will be really interesting for me to read, watch, or listen to. And actually, as a result of that, she's connected me with this thing, or I've discovered something new. Or one of my other sponsors might say about me, well, she's always so open to sharing her connections. And she always knows really talented people, and she's great at connecting talented people with new opportunities. So she's always the first person I ring when I think about, I need someone new in my team. So they can just start to bring to life your value. And like I said, to be able to do that, they need to see you at your best. If it's a manager, I think it's probably the easiest, hopefully, because they see you the most. If it's a mentor, you might want to think about, well, how do you keep your mentors updated with what you're working on? How do you share the work you're doing? If it's someone like someone a bit further away from you, another leader in your organization, can you get involved in projects, or can you volunteer for things where you'll get more interaction with them? I think people only need to see relatively small slices of you sometimes to start to organically, as James says, build that sponsorship. I once eventually went to work for someone who did become a sponsor, but I noticed someone in Sainsbury's, so I thought, I think she would be a brilliant sponsor, and just started to kind of find my way of spending a bit more time with her, very kind of gradually, and ultimately actually did go and work for her. And one of the reasons I went to work for her is I thought I could see the characteristics of sponsorship. She always wanted people to be brilliant. She was happy to kind of leave her ego at the door. She was actually quite challenging to work for at times, but she is still a sponsor for me today. So that sponsorship has just grown and grown and grown. So just think about those stories and those examples. Give people that ammunition and those examples, so that when they are talking about you when you're not in the room, they can do it in a really compelling way. Back to that strengths-based question, what do you want people to say about you when you're not in the room? And then just remembering this point about, I think you can have a sponsor that kind of lasts for a little bit of time. You might have the odd sponsor that lasts for kind of the whole of your career. And you might have kind of sponsors that last for a bit, kind of the in-between sponsors. But if you think about it, it's very rare that one sponsor can open up all of the doors that you would like to be opened. And so don't be afraid to think about having sponsors, plural, so kind of more than one. And also to notice that when things change for you or when things change for them, it will impact their ability to be a sponsor for you. If I think about, I was probably a sponsor for some people, where now, because of what I do now, because I'm in a different industry, I'm less useful. Because I could probably mentor, I can give people advice, but I still sometimes get people come to me. I actually had an email yesterday from someone who I've definitely sponsored in the past, saying, I'm being made redundant, I'm looking for these kinds of roles. And I thought, I just know that I'm less helpful than I used to be in that area, because I don't work in marketing anymore. So I don't know, I've not got my finger on the pulse in the same way. So what I can do instead is think about, well, who else do I feel like I could point this person in a different direction to me, who I feel like might be more helpful. So my relationship with that person now has become more about advice or insight or connections, but less about active advocacy and sponsorship, because I'm just not in a position to do that now in the same way. So really think about, if you've got sponsors right now, great. Would another sponsor be useful? Who might that be? What might that look like? If you've got no sponsors today, I would just think about, where's the best place to start? What's the most important door that you need opening right now? Or perhaps, where can you just spot if you're kind of learning about this for the first time, where can you spot someone else who already does this really well, and how can you start to kind of build your relationship with them? Let me just see what Kerry's saying. The TED Talk in the pod sheet. Yeah, so if you're new or if you've not started using these, this is very much credit to Helen and the team. We've started to create pod sheets every week, which are downloadable worksheets that you can fill in, which just help you work through the key points from the podcast, ask you a few questions, hopefully, again, make it a more useful and kind of interactive experience. Okay, brilliant. And I just thought we would finish this morning. I was reading, we will put in the chat now, there's a really good article that Sylvia-Anne Hewlett wrote at the end of last year. So though her work has been around for quite a long time, she kind of updated it based on the pandemic. And I just picked out these quotes that she ended this article with. We'll put the link in the chat as well. But I just thought some good things to think about. So the best sponsors offer not only vision, but also the tactical means of realizing it. I think this goes back to our point about action. Successful proteges, as she says, but I think, you know, sponsees are people who ask for, you know, they're looking for stretch, they're looking for guidance, even feedback, thinking about that as well. They'll coach you, look for people who've got that coaching capability. And spotlight's a really good word. I do think that's the idea of kind of they put a spotlight on you. And then they talk, actually, we've not really talked about this as much today, but they talk about values, but also, again, back to this point that I talked about in Give, this is all about your strengths. So I hope that's been helpful. I don't think sponsorship is an easy topic. And I think some organizations have actually started to, which I find really interesting, create sponsorship programs. So they're actually kind of using that as a name and encouraging it to help to happen a bit more formally, which I think is really interesting. We can share some examples of how that's happening if that's useful. But I would just encourage you, a bit like James was saying, I think this is an organic process, but equally there are some actions you can take that make it much more likely to happen. Oh, lovely. That's a great observation there from Laura, kind of going, also sponsors within squiggliness is quite an interesting thing to think about. What does sponsorship in a squiggly context look and feel like? Kelly, I will dig out a few of those examples of people who are doing formal sponsorship programs, because I think it's really interesting. It's Nationwide, who I think I know are doing one. So let me find out whether I can share some examples of that. Always email me, sarah@amazingif.com, if there's any questions or anything we can help you on. Otherwise, I hope you enjoy the rest of your Thursday. I hope that's been a helpful session. Any feedback, as ever, please do let us know. Thank you so much, everyone.